Well, good afternoon everybody, and thank you for joining me on this live stream this afternoon. I'm going to interpret this lovely sunset. As I've said in my other videos, I'm not going to try and copy it. I'm just using this as inspiration. It's well suited to the Bob Ross style because it's got a lovely blended sky, some small mountains, silhouettes and reflections. So first thing to do, as always, is mix our liquid white. Now I'm using artisan water soluble oils and artisan modified linseed oil from Winsor & Newton. If you're painting with Bob Ross materials, then obviously you're just using the liquid white straight out of the tub, but I've got to make my own. So to make it, basically all it is a 50-50 mix of titanium white and linseed oil, but it must be the artisan linseed oil if you're using water soluble oils, because it's been specifically modified to use. Don't try and mix water soluble products with oil based products, because that will go horribly wrong. As you can probably appreciate, oil and water don't mix. Okay, so we'll discuss the specifics of this picture in a minute. I just want to prepare my canvas. I use the word canvas loosely because I'm actually painting on oil paper. Now the reason I do this is because I paint a lot. Canvases are quite expensive and they're quite bulky as well, and having loads of those around the house is not practical for me, whereas this oil paper is a fraction of the price, and when things are dry you can just stack them up in a portfolio, so that works well for me. Now all I'm doing here is doing a thin cover of the liquid white on the canvas stroke oil paper, and it must be thin. Okay, if this is too wet, then your paint's going to go all slick and in extreme cases would drip off, and if this is too dry you won't be able to blend at all. So this is quite a crucial step. I'm just actually removing the excess paint off my brush because it feels to me like I might have a little bit too much. So you don't need much, and you need to work it in quite hard. You can make sure that your canvas is covered by looking down the side, and you can see the areas which are not covered because they'll be matte, as opposed to the areas which are covered. If you think you've got too much on, I don't usually do this, but I have seen it done. If you think you've got too much on, just use a bit of a towel, paper towel or cloth, just to dab some of it off, and then just smooth that out again. You just want fairly even strokes, nice thin covering. Okay, so that's the basis, that's our starting point. There we go. Brush I'm using is just a quarter inch, half inch decorator's brush, the type that you'd paint a house with. Okay, so let me get this liquid white out of the way. Don't need that anymore. So let's have a look at our source picture. So firstly, colours. So you've got a very bright red and orange, bit of yellow down by the horizon, blues, purples, and then dark colour. Interpret that as black or dark brown or dark red blue, whatever. Okay, so as with Bob, we're going to go from sky down and get a nicely blended sky in first. Then we'll put the horizon in and these trees on the side. Then we'll deal with the water, and finally we'll put the rocks in and the rock reflections. Okay, now I'm not sure if I can keep this on the screen at the same time. I need to put it somewhere so I can see it myself, but I don't think I can keep it I think I can put it somewhere where you guys can see it as well. You've got the thumbnail anyway, so you can see what I'm doing. So, first thing about this sky is that it's going from light to dark. The horizon, rather unusually for a picture, is about halfway. That's usually a strict no-no. You should usually have it at 1/3 or 2/3, but halfway. But we can live with that because we've got this interest in the foreground. So what I'm seeing in the picture is down at the horizon we've got a little bit of yellow, and that's quite light, and then you've got light blue going into darker blue, going into dark blue, and then we're going to put the purple and red clouds over the top. So to start with, I'm just going to get a touch of cad yellow. Don't need a lot of this because there's not much going on, so just a little smooch of that. I'm going to use the same brush as I did for the white. Just drag that out. The white will just make it a little bit lighter, which is no big deal. We're just trying to get an impression of light down by the horizon. So think about where your halfway point is, think about where your horizon's going to be, and just, we're using little crisscross strokes, just drop in a little light spot. Okay, this turns out to be too big later on, you can always paint over it. Okay, I'm just going to clean my brush off there, go into a little bit more yellow, and just right in the center where I want my focal point to be, just going to make that bit a touch brighter. Now as you apply that yellow paint, it will mix with the white that's already on the canvas and will dilute it. So if you want a strong area, you need to just keep going back in. Okay, so then next step is doing that blue. So I always use ultramarine blue. You can use cerulean blue if you've got like a light, a bright happy sky. Cobalt blue as well, but I tend to stick with French ultramarine. So because we're going from dark at the top to light at the bottom, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the pure ultramarine straight out the tube, load up a fair amount on the same brush, and then we'll start in the dark spots, to be up in the top layer here. Halfway I'm just going to reload because I'm picking up white paint. Okay, and then what I can do is just gradually work that down into the lighter areas. Now there's a danger of being too dark here, so I'm just going to wipe off most of that blue and then just go back in, mixing with the white on the canvas so it's getting lighter. You can see how it's getting lighter by itself. And just go in, touch the edge of that blue. Don't be tempted to go into the yellow, because we all know that blue and yellow make green. And although you do get green in the sky, you don't really want it to be obviously green in this case. Okay, so we want to preserve that light, and then what I'm just going to do is get a bit more pure ultramarine and just darken up that corner. If you're finding that your colour's getting too light on your brush, just reload, because it's just picking up the lighter colour. Okay. And then what I'm just doing is I'm just having a look where there's a few darker areas in the sky, and just dropping in a few darker spots. Okay. Next step is just to blend that. So I've got my blender brush here, which is quite a large brush, quite long bristles, but it's incredibly soft. Really, really soft. Okay, and what we're going to do, start with the dark areas and just gently crisscross, barely touching the canvas. Stay in the blue for now. Get that blue blended through. Just blend that. You can see that you've got good variation in the blue automatically. It's already giving the impression of the sky. Wiping that off. Now you've got to be careful here where the blue touches the yellow. You want to gently blend them into each other, but don't overdo it. And don't destroy your yellow. Okay, just gently go across. Don't take the blue back into the yellow. Take the blue back into the yellow. It's going to disappear. Not surprisingly, it's going to become blue, and you don't want that. Okay, so we've got a blend going on there, but we've kept the yellow. Next step then is to have a look at this ready orange. Now I'm not entirely sure what colour I'm doing here. I'm going to use alizarin crimson, which is very strong red. I think that on its own might be a bit too strong, so I need to just test the colour here. So again, just wipe down my brush, get the blue off it. I'm going to take a touch of the alizarin crimson, and I mean a touch because it's very strong, and pop it into the cad yellow. Don't overmix it. Okay, you're looking for an orange, but don't overmix it, because what that will give you is it'll give you yellows and reds as well. You get some nice variation. So I don't know if you can see that, but there's like an orange, and I don't know if this is the right colour, but we'll have a look. So on the picture there's a nice striking streak that comes across. Not actually that bright. The colour that I've mixed there, it's quite orange, whereas in the picture it looks a little bit more red. So I'm just going to add a bit more crimson and just put that across. Now again, you're just roughly blocking where the clouds are. Okay. Just looking at you do have to reload the brush. Already run out of my sort of orange mix, so I'm just going to put a bit more yellow, a bit more crimson, mix that up. That's a real firecracker colour, to use Bob's term. Oh, it's a firecracker. Looking over this side, you've got like an orange cloud over here. You can tell that this is not that precise, but you don't, you're not out to copy the picture. You want your interpretation of it. You're only really looking at the lights now. You can come and drop the darks in afterwards. So you want you want to just block them out. Give some indications of little wisps and things going on. Go down here into the horizon. Okay. So we've got quite a lot going on there. So next step, just going to blend that out and see what it looks like. I'm still very much just blocking in colour at this stage. So you're just trying to get an impression of those clouds and where they are. Softening them up. Think about which way you're moving your brush, because your brush will sort of determine the shape that you get. So if you've got an idea in your mind, which way the wind's going or what your shape of your cloud should be, it does help. I think at one point Bob says you should pretend to be a cloud. I'm not quite sure how you do that, but That's not bad. That's just putting in blocking in a little bit of a background. Not that strong, much stronger on the photograph we're working from. But again, that's just our first phase, if you like. I'm going to go a bit darker. It's going to be mainly red with just a touch of yellow in. We'll have another go now. So think about which bits you want light. All I'm going to do is I'm going to run across the top edge. Just keep it consistent. Run across the top edge. Where you think the light's going to be. Just building up a little bit of colour. Vary the colours. Some can be more yellow and red, some can be more red than yellow. Now, made a classic mistake there. I went in that blue at the top, and then I went into my light area, and I've now managed to put blue right in the middle of my picture. So that's not good, but what we can do is I'm just going to get a clean brush I've not used before and just lift that blue out. Looks like a mess at the minute, but don't worry. Okay, and then just get the blender and just blend that out. You won't get rid of it completely, but you can certainly get rid of what was a disaster and just soften it out. Seems like quite a painful approach, this, to put paint on, take it off, put paint on, take it off. But what you're not doing is you're not taking off all the paint. You know, each time you're adding a little bit more colour, a bit more form, a bit more depth. Okay, that's quite nice. But what I want is I want the middle to be brighter. So I'm just going to use a bit of a smaller brush and a bit of a deeper, this is pure alizarin crimson now, and what I want to do is get some contrast going with that yellow. And I'm just going to drop in the indication of some little firecracker clouds at the bottom. Not easy to say that, clouds. Just in a few places, don't overdo it. Basically all I'm doing here is like just putting in some indications of some darker areas. Again, when you first put them on they look a bit of a mess, but once you've blended them they'll make a bit more sense. Just putting a bit of red into that sky. Okay, blend the brush, again make sure it's clean. Not doing any brush washing here, just wiping. You'll find that wiping's enough. So again, just draw that out. See how that's merging nicely into that orangey colour. It gives the impression of a little bit of a shadow. Can't emphasize enough how gentle you have to be with this. This is not, it's not something that you carefully plan. You'll know when you're happy with it, and you're not like going, well, here's a cloud and this is the shape of it and this is exactly what it looks like. You are just following a technique to get a result that is pleasing. And experience will tell you when you're happy with it. Okay, so you can see those streaks that I put in now just become low lying clouds. So I'm just going to have a sip of water and have a look at that and see if that's anything like what I wanted it to be. And you know what? I'm quite happy with that. It's not the same as the picture, but it's got good light, good colours. So I think we're going to call that sky done and move on. So in the reference, next step is this central band. So we've got some small hills, and we've got a dark bank that seems to extend right over, and then a bit more detail on this side with the trees. Okay, so first step is to put those little hills in, and then we'll put that bank that runs all the way across. Now the thing about those hills is that they've got dark tops, and then they give the impression of having snow on them. I don't know if they actually do, but they give the impression. So because they're kind of outlined, I'm going to use a relatively small brush to pop them in. And again, not entirely sure what colour I want here. So what I'm doing is I've got ultramarine blue, and I've put in a tiny bit of lamp black, tiny bit. Now the purists will be going, oh my god, he's using black, but you know, I'm an amateur, so I can use black, I'm allowed. So this peak over here, I'm just going to go up and across, and that gives me, because it's mixed again with the white, giving me a fairly dark, light edge. If you look on the reference, it is light. You know, it's not black. You want to save your bolder colours for nearer the viewer. So I'm just going to touch in that effectively what is a bit of a grey. Reload my brush, and then we've got a couple more hills over here, about the centre. Preserve this yellow. I want to wipe that out because we've worked hard for that. Just a little hill that goes over, and then there's another one that sort of comes behind, and that just sort of drifts off into the distance. And you don't have to give any detail, you just need to give an indication. And where one mountain meets another, if you want to sort of suggest depth, then just concentrate on getting a little bit of a darker colour. Just pop it so you've got a differentiation between the edges. So don't go too dark, because you need the dark for the layers towards the front. Okay, in the reference there is sort of like a cloud bank that goes across there in like a purple, but I'm not going to do that because I'm quite happy with that yellow and red that I've got down at the bottom. So now we're going to do the bank that sits in front of the one we've just painted, and in the reference it's a lot darker. So just have a little test. Yeah, that'll do. And then we're just going to run a bank in front of that hill or distant mountain. Okay, you will have to go back and reload your brush because it mixes with the white on the canvas, and will just get gradually lighter. I'm just going to pop in these bank here. Again, I'm keen to preserve this yellow, so I don't want to go any higher. I'm just going to go across here. Make sure your horizon's straight. Nobody likes a wonky horizon. Make this a bit darker over here, so I've got some contrast going on. Leave some natural colour variation in this because it suggests, you know, shadows and bumps and what have you. And then over this side we've got quite a steep bank, so work out where your height is. So I want to go up to about just above here, so we call that the top. Comes down and goes up again, and then the bank kind of comes down, maybe not that steep, it comes down and it joins this piece over here. Okay, and just block this piece in. Don't go too low, because if you look in the reference, there's quite a lot of water. At least half of the picture is water in the foreground, so just trying to get a rough shape. Okay, and then the bank's got trees on it, so for the trees, fairly straightforward technique, certainly for small trees. So if we look here at the bottom where we've got small trees, all you're doing is you're going into that dark paint and just sort of slowly flicking up. Leave little gaps, do them at different heights. Remember to recharge your brush of the odd, clearly distinct tree. So you can say, for example, here I pull it up to give me a collection of trees, and then put in a bigger one. Here you just have something that's a bit, suggestion of a bit bigger. Don't think too much about these, just drop them in. This is not where you're going to have your detail. And give some indications if you want, you know, on the horizon here, that it's not super flat. Okay. So what we're doing here is, if we drop the bank on the right a little bit, just drop that down a little bit, so you've got a slight curve, gives the indication that it's the beginning of like a bay or something that's coming round. And similarly on this side, if you wanted to, you could take one of these hills, just push it out a bit, and then if you go back from that position, just pull it out a bit at the bottom, you've effectively got a bit of a curved thing going the other way as well. Okay, I've exaggerated that. Okay, now one thing I'm noticing here is that my against the reference, this piece isn't really dark enough, so I'm just going to add a bit more dark paint, still using a mix of predominantly ultramarine and a little bit of lamp black. just to get that. Quite like that light piece there. You can see the hill. I'm just going to darken. Just play around a little bit with the light and darken some areas and not darken other areas, and it'll give the impression of different sort of things going on, undulations and light being cast by the sunset. It doesn't have to be okay. Fairly happy with that. Good. So next step is the water. Now obviously what we've got in the reference is we've got over here by the edge of the lake, I guess you'd expect that to be quite deep, and then we're on the shoreline here, so this is deep, and then you've got like a typical like ripples breaking, and this is very, very shallow. So that's why this area here is far more reflective than that area there. You can see actually there's indications of some darker pieces from the reflections, but there's nothing that significant, so there aren't any there. So we're just going to put this mid piece in, and we're going to look closely at the fact that there's reflections here in the center but not so much going on the side. Okay, so the first thing to do is get your base color in. Okay, I'm seeing that as quite purpley. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back to my bigger brush, wipe off the orange that I've got going on in there. I'm going to mix ultramarine blue, which I've managed to run out of, so I'll just put a bit more out, ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson, which will create one of my favourite colours, which is like a port plum colour. It's like a deep burgundy. It's a fantastic colour. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to drop this in the top section. So quick test to see what it's looking like. Yeah, that's nice and dark, that's okay. So going from the outside in, so just pulling it across, try and stay straight, outside in, all the way across. And what that's doing is, firstly it's obviously covering the white, and secondly, because it's mixing with the white, you're getting these lovely ripple effects. Now if you don't go straight across, you get these lines. These are like where the brush has stopped, but you can get rid of those just by carefully going back over. Now you don't want to overwork this, because if you go over it too many times, then all you do is you'll end up with it one colour, and you want that lovely mix. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that for the light areas, but it's not going to cut it for the dark areas because it's just dark enough. So what I'm going to do is just put in some darker colour at the bottom here, and I can see some darker pieces going up here, certainly some darker here underneath this tree line. So just make some of it a little bit darker. Okay. And what you can really do to accentuate the dark areas, just mix a really dark colour. So I'm just going to go pure alizarin crimson, pure ultramarine, and then I'm just going to drop in this indication of some waves. I think for this I might need a slightly smaller brush. I don't want these waves to be too fat, so I'm just going to load up a little brush, nice and flat. I don't know if you can see how sort of chiseled that is, so it's giving me quite a fine tip. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run that darker colour into those lighter areas there and across to give the indication of some darker waves. And don't worry if they're not that straight, you can fix them when you blend it. So the idea is, here you've got the dark landscape, and you have a light patch, you have a bit of a darker patch, then a bit of a lighter patch, then a bit of a darker patch. And then what you can do once you've got those colours in is go back to your blender and just sort of smooth them out. Be very gentle not to drag your bank, wreck your bank. Okay. So that one there is exactly what I was looking for. The rest of them are a bit weedy, to be honest. So what I'm going to do is have another go. So the biggest problem with this wet on wet technique that I find, it's great for blending, but because you're blending with liquid white, everything gets lighter as you paint it. So it's quite difficult, I find, to get your dark colours down. And when you're not used to painting in this technique, when you put a dark colour on like that, as a beginner, an absolute beginner, you're thinking, oh my gosh, look, I had a reasonable picture there, and I'm going to put some dark lines over it, and I've ruined it. But this is why you watch tutorials and videos, I guess, because it gives you confidence to try these things and realise that it's not the disaster that you thought it was. So I've gone fairly heavy there. Struggling with the size of my blender brush because this is quite a small piece of paper. Thankfully I have a little blender brush. It does exactly the same as the large one, but it allows me to work on smaller areas without blending things I don't want to blend. That makes sense. I'm just going to blend that through. A nice strong blue line in there now. Be everybody's cup of tea, but I quite like the variation. And then I'm just gonna some more, a bit further down. Ooh. Got a happy little accent there. I managed to pick up some white and smudge it the other way, and it looks like a ripple. So leave that. Now the other thing to notice about this water, if I bring the reference in, is that not surprisingly down here you've got all the colours coming out of the sky. So we need to make sure that colours that we put up in the sky we're pulling down into the bottom, because otherwise we won't get any contrast for these rocks. I've deliberately gone a bit lighter here to give us some contrast, but I want these sky colours So back to our, hopefully, need to think about, you know, if you want to reuse colours. I've still got my orange and my red and what have you, so I'm just going back, and I'm just now going to drop in some of these orange colours. The yellow just here. And the easiest way to, if you want to think about how to, you know, what you're putting where, just think about this being a mirror and you're reverse painting it. So if you've got red here, then you should have a bit of red down here. If you've got red here, you should have a bit over here. If you've got, you know, it doesn't have to be exact, but if you're roughly trying to mirror your reflections, and what it will do is you'll make certain that you get the colours from the sky. Again, that looks like a big mess, but once we've blended it, we'll see where we are. So just gently blend these colours in. So we've now got an indication of some of those colours. Probably haven't got enough though. The reference shows a lovely sort of down the centre here, lovely sort of bright, almost pinky. So what I'm going to do is just mix up like a light pink. So I've got my alizarin crimson and a touch of titanium white to try and mix up like a light pinky colour. See what that looks like. Coming down through here. A bit around this side. I'm also seeing some orange, quite firecracker orange, so I'm just going to get some yellow, alizarin crimson, mix up quite a strong orange. Made it too red. And again, just down through here. Some indications of some orange. Right, so as before, we'll blend that in. Again, really light, otherwise you're just going to wipe this straight off. There we go, that's quite nice. Still would like it to be a bit lighter down the bottom. So put some more of that light in there. And blend that through. There we go. And I think with all that blending, the corners, bottom corners have gone a bit too light. So I'm just going to darken those up. Put in a bit more of my darker purple. So that's just crimson and ultramarine blue mixed. Give a darkish purple. And what I'll do, just to break it up, just put the odd dark patch. Not too much. And then again, just blend that. Okay. Rock time. So these rocks are quite round, so they're not really, if they were square I'd put them in with a palette knife, I think, but they're quite round and also quite dark. They're easily the darkest thing in the picture. Maybe that this is the same darkness, but this is clearly much darker than what we've got going on there. So what we're going to do is get our lamp black, make it a bit more interesting. I'm going to put some ultramarine in it and some crimson in it, just give it a bit more variation. Decide where our first rock is going to be and just pop it in. Now again, you're not copying, so go with your own shapes here. Reload the brush, and then don't put the reflections in at this stage. I'll show you how to do those. Just another little indication of a bit of a smaller rock there. Different shape one coming up, pointier. Just here. There's no rule. You can put as many or as few of things as you want, really. The big one over here, this one's like quite jaggedy. It just drops off there before we get to that one. I wouldn't recommend you overlap the rocks in a picture like this, because everything's silhouetted, it'll all like mush into one. So, you know, have them close by to each other and different angles and different shapes and what have you, but I wouldn't necessarily overlap them. I think might just put one in here as well. All looks a bit flat at the moment. That's to be expected because we haven't put any reflections or anything in. Okay, so that's roughly the rocks. Now you can, even in a fairly dark sunset like this, you can still put variation into the rock, and you just need to think about where the dark side would be and where the light side. So here I'm just going to make the left edges a little bit darker and just leave the right edges so that they give in the impression of just glistening and maybe catching the last of the rays. More of an optical illusion, really. Just suggesting a little bit more roundness to the rocks. Especially here, I mean, the light looks wrong on this one because it's just too light. one out considerably. Let's finish these last couple off. These things don't really come to life until you put their reflections in. I think I might just pop in a few little indications of things here. Okay, so reflections. So on the reference, as I said, for these banks here, there's not really much indication of reflections, but it would naturally just be a little bit darker underneath. I'm just going to put a very small amount of that dark underneath, similarly just under here. Okay. And then with the rocks, what you want is a nice flat brush if you've got one, he says. Not being able to find one. I must have one somewhere. This one will do. This has got a flat edge. So you've already got your paint on the canvas for the reflections. What you need to do is make it work for you. Okay, so we'll do it with this rock first. Do it with a wider brush. There we go, that was the one I was looking for. See how this one's much wider. So remember, this is all still wet. So reflections go straight down. So touch on the edge of the black, or the edge of the rock there, push quite firmly, and then just pull it down. And pull it down, and pull it down, and then pull it down. Okay? Now that's picked up quite a lot of white or lighter paint. So wipe that off. And do the next one. So just pull it down. Key thing here is that you go straight, because the reflections will be straight down. Now I know things aren't exactly the same as the reference, but you know, I've probably worked out by now that I'm not overly hung up on the references as long as it's close-ish and I'm happy with it. This is getting a little bit messy. We'll need one smaller brush to just do the reflections for these. Okay. I just need to do the same here. Just produce these reflections. Okay, and that looks like a load of jellyfish. We're not finished yet. So having pulled down, you now need to go lightly across, and that will give you the ripples. So if I do it with this first over here, just going to go very lightly across, and that gives you the indication of a reflection. Do it lightly and only do it once or twice. All of a sudden, use a smaller brush to get in there. It starts to look a bit more wet. Now I've got a few repairs to do here, because I've managed to paint over my mountains on the brain. Managed to paint over my rocks, so I just need to crispen up this edge again on some of these rocks. Just crispen that up again. Just make sure you've done all your bits. Don't leave any obvious downstrokes. Then here I'm just going to give some indications of bigger shadows. Just blend those across. Just making it a little bit darker. Okay. So the final thing, I forgot, I need to just blend up by the horizon now. Put some dark in and I didn't blend it. Let me just blend that through. Is that we've got some indications of some sort of waves coming in. So I don't want to go in there with white because that's just way too strong a light colour. I'm just going to mix up a tiny bit of sort of lavender, which is just purple with white added, and then what I'm just going to do is just put the suggestion of some lighter waves coming in. Again, we're going to blend this in a minute, so it might look a bit much at this stage. Once it's been blended, you'll see that it just lightens a few pieces here and there. Just gives it a bit more contrast, which is kind of what we're after. Okay. Mr. Rock there, a spiky rock. And got a little bit of a okay. Good. I want to make those rocks, I think I want to make those rocks look a bit more rounded, so I'm going to get some white paint and just mix up a little sort of dark, well, a light lavender really. And then what you can do is just pick which side you want to be a bit lighter and put it on like this. And then what we can do is we can just blend that to just give it a bit more, just gives it a bit more life, I suppose. And just very gently just blend that. Okay. I'm a very messy painter. I keep painting over bits that I've finished. I have to redo the edges. Okay, that's good. Quite happy with that. So I think the only thing we're going to do now is just put a little bit of a waterline here and there, which will zing things up a bit, and then we'll call it done. So for the waterline, I'm just going to get some, I've got some white paint here, it's got a bit of red already in it, so it's just giving me like a pink. You want quite a light colour. Wouldn't usually use white because that's just too unnatural looking, but just go for you know, something that, a light colour that matches your colorscape. So all I'm trying to do here is suggest some ripples and water movement going on. So I'm just popping it down and then scraping it. You can put these things in the middle of the water to suggest you've got waves and water movement going on. It's already kind of got it there, so I'm not going to touch that because I quite like the way that looks like it's lapping up the bank. But it looks good on these rocks, so we'll just scrape it here at the base where the waterline would be. Just sort of scratch it in. It gives the indication of kind of water moving around. The rocks, gives it a bit of fluidity. It's not bad. Size that one a bit more. And just put in a little. There we go. If for whatever reason you do one and you don't like it, then just get your blender brush. This one here is a bit fat, and just blend it out. It's quite nice here, but the edges are a bit messy, so just blend that through. And you can also put in the indication of a sort of shoreline, a wave line, where if you just pop your knife down and then sort of smooth it and scratch it over the surface, keep it moving, looks like a wave. And then if you get a small brush usually with quite, you know, a dark shadow purple. If you can just touch that in underneath, very subtle, what it does is it effectively gives a shadow to that bit of water. It just makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional. Right, just a final look, see if there's anything I want to tidy up. I don't think so. Yep, I think we'll call that one done. As he says that, he finds a bit of rock that he's painted over. So just check, you know, it's easy to lose some of the details in the whole piece. You know, just notice, for example, I've put no waterline around that rock here in the middle. So let me just correct that. I've got enough light pink paint left. So I hope you've enjoyed today's demonstration. If you have, subscribe and leave me a like. And while we're all in lockdown, I'm trying to do one of these at least every other day, if not every day. Just depends what jobs I'm given. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll call that one done. And see you next time. Thanks a lot.